One of my favorite kids' books is an old weird one that probably hardly any of you have heard of called The Shrinking of Treehorn. So I'll tell you a little bit, really quick, what it's about. There's this kid named Treehorn. He's got a weird name. He finds a weird board game, and by playing it, he starts shrinking. And so he has trouble in his life because he can't reach the snacks and things that he's hidden in his closet at a certain height. But the weird thing about the book is that none of the grown-ups in his life believe it's happening. So like when he's sitting at the dinner table and he's like really short, his parents are like, "Sit up, Treehorn, why don't you sit up?" And he's like, "I'm shrinking." And they're like, "People don't shrink." And he's at school and he can't reach the water fountain, so he's jumping up and down to get to the water fountain, and he gets in trouble for jumping in the hall. And he's like, "But I'm shrinking." And they're like, "Treehorn, nobody shrinks." And it doesn't matter how much evidence is right in front of them that Treehorn's getting smaller, they never believe it, even though it's right in front of them, because in their mind, they're convinced that nobody shrinks. See something very similar happening in today's 5-minute devotional with Jesus and a bunch of people. So we're in John chapter 12, beginning at the second half of verse 36, going through verse 43. When Jesus had said these things, he departed and hid himself from them. Though he had done so many signs before them, they still did not believe him. So that the word spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled, "Lord, who has believed what he heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" Therefore they could not believe, for Isaiah again said, "He has blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them." Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him. Nevertheless, even many of the authorities believed in him, but for fear of the Pharisees they did not confess it, so that they would not be put out of the synagogue. For they love the glory that comes from people more than the glory that comes from God. So, just like Treehorn, Jesus, throughout the Gospel of John, has done a bunch of miraculous signs. He's done things that no regular human being could do, and he's said things that no regular human being could say, and yet still, for people who, in their minds, nope, he couldn't be the Messiah, there's no amount of evidence that would change their minds. And this is true today as well. Sometimes we might think, if you're a Christian, you might think, hey, well, what if just God came and somehow proved that God was real? Did some big miraculous thing? Then everybody would believe. But I think we see from the Gospels that it kind of doesn't matter. People don't just believe something that they don't accept as a reality, even if it's staring them in the face. Just like Treehorn shrinking. Or Jesus raising Lazarus or from the dead or whatever else. But there were people here who did believe in him, as it says at the end of this passage. Even some of the religious authorities, but they were afraid. They were afraid of being kicked out of the synagogue. Remember, that happened to the man who was born blind. And when we talked about that way back in chapter 9, it had real big consequences for his life. So people were afraid of that, so they didn't want to admit that they were, but that they believed that Jesus was the real deal. And this is a temptation today too, isn't it? Like sometimes there might be social consequences for following Jesus. And it's a big temptation, isn't it, to be more afraid of what other people will think than to be afraid of or really care about, as it says here, the glory that comes from God. And I think that's something that we can all work on, that maybe even pray about if you're having trouble with, hey, I'm afraid of what people are going to think of me if they know what I really believe. You can ask Jesus for help with that. And we'll see that there's at least one disciple, somebody who becomes a disciple who is from this group who's going to do something really important before the end of the gospel, who's going to step out and not be a secret disciple anymore and do something that will really be a very important thing for Jesus at the end.